Hi, everybody. This is Christopher Phillips, the founder of Democracy Cafe. Our flagship initiatives are Democracy Cafe and Socrates Cafe, with hundreds of groups ongoing around the globe. And we also have a group called Constitution Cafe, and that's where I came to know, in a way, our guest today, Lawrence Lessig, Roy L. Furman Professor of Law and Leadership at Harvard University. And Larry, you had written a book that coincided with the release of my Constitution Cafe that I thought was much better than mine, called Republic Lost. And you even kindly came. I just earned my PhD at 50, and I was teaching at Penn as on fellowship. And you kindly came. I used your book, Republic Lost, as our principal text for a class I developed called Money and Democracy. And so my question to you as we celebrate, commemorate, mourn International Day of Democracy is, where is democracy in America? As much as you warned us about institutional corruption 13, 14 years ago, uh, talked about Lesterland and the oligarchy so many years ago, are now talking about elections still being stolen, that where Congress is being feckless and serving as a check and balance on an unchecked, unbalanced executive office. Is there anything that we can celebrate? Anything positive?
Well, I do think there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is the obvious news. When we were talking about institutional corruption 12 years ago, what we were focused on mainly was a kind of corruption that was almost invisible to most people. It was the corruption that came from campaign finance and the dependency that created between the funders of campaigns and politicians. And the reality that politicians were constantly making their judgments about what to do in light of what they knew would help them or hurt them in raising money. And so that wasn't the old style kind of quid pro quo bribery. That was just a reality that people lived with, that basically said to them, if you don't keep the funders of campaigns happy, you
Mhm.
won't come back to Congress. In America, for many years after the 15th Amendment, much of the South had what was in effect white primaries for the Democratic Party, which basically said the only people who could vote in the Democratic primary were white people. Anybody could vote in the general election, but in the primary, it's only white people. Well, we have a money primary in the United States, and it's the super wealthy who get a vote in that. The rest of us don't. And then whoever the super wealthy have effectively chosen then gets to run with the rest of us. But the problem right now has metastasized from that form of corruption to
Mhm.
something that's much more troubling and actually familiar to much of the world. Because the kind of corruption that we're seeing now in the United States is the kind of corruption that is endemic, for example, in the former Soviet republics. I'm a big supporter of Ukraine in their fight to defend themselves against Russian aggression. But it's true to say that the Ukraine government was suffering under enormous corruption because many of the people who went to government went there expecting that the thing they would get from service in government was private benefit for themselves. It was just another way to get rich. Like in, America or in Europe, the way you get rich is you go out and you start a new business or have some great idea for a product. In these countries, the way you get rich is you go work for the government. And the kind of open recognition that this is all kind of a game. Yeah, I might give you 10% of my attention for the public interest, but the real thing I'm going to be doing is making sure that my private interest is constantly benefited. That kind of corruption was invisible in the United States. I don't think it existed, certainly at the level of Congress, but never at the level of the president. Never did you have a president who was directly acting to benefit himself personally and financially. During the Clinton administration, people got outraged because they thought Clinton was acting in a way that would benefit the Democratic Party, the so-called, scandal around selling access to the Lincoln bedroom, effectively. That was all money that was going to the party. That was all political in the kind of sense that we all understand politics infects everything in government. But now what we have is a president who is openly acting to enrich himself personally. And he's telling us, look, trust me,
Right.
I'm doing what's in the interest of the public. It might just happen to also benefit me personally.
So what
And of
happened to
course,
the emoluments clause?
yeah,
What's going on? Are we even a constitutional republic anymore?
well, the problem is that the Supreme Court has erected a whole pile of limitations on the ability to enforce constitutional provisions. So there's a general question about whether there's anybody who can enforce the emoluments clause. And the three cases that were bubbling up in the courts in the last Trump administration all got mooted out, meaning got dismissed once Trump was no longer president. And the general concern is it's hard to see who has the kind of interest to be able to enforce this in a judicial manner. But the point is, we didn't need to enforce it judicially ever before because the internal ethics, the norms of the presidency and of the president would never have allowed him to act in a way that so directly benefited him personally. Now, I'm not saying they were all angels. I mean, Lyndon Johnson's wife owned a broadcasting network. There's lots of games with the FCC. I'm not saying he didn't benefit from that, but the idea that somebody would so openly, be proud of the fact that they've increased their personal net worth by, I don't know what the number is, 3 billion. The last number I read was $5 billion
Mhm.
in less than a year in the presidency
Mhm.
is really outrageous, and it puts us on a par with these other, struggling democracies, the former Soviet Republic democracies. And I think this is a critical problem to fight, because if we allow this to become the new norm, then we've become the banana republic that we've spent 200 and some years fighting to be something better than.
Usually you don't realize we've become what we fear until it's too late. Democratic mechanisms can be used to subvert open societies. One of my big concerns is the fact that we haven't been able to have a malleable constitution in the sense that we haven't had a new amendment since
Yes, 70. I mean,
1972.
we had 92 was the
27th Amendment about increasing congressional salaries, and so that avenue basically seems to be shut off as well. That we've ossified to an extent that unless Congress is feckless and spineless and does its job, there's few venues for we the people to take any stances and stands. I mean, now you have this group calling themselves the Resistance. They feel like such a
yeah.
minority.
Yeah, no, it's certainly true. We no longer have the capacity to amend the Constitution through, the traditional means. Every amendment has been proposed by Congress, and all but one have been ratified by state legislatures. The 21st Amendment was ratified by state conventions. But I think the problem here is that people have become too narrow in the thinking about the constitutional tools that are available to us. I think we need to rally around the idea that it's time for an Article 5 convention. And I kind of think of it as the No Kings, Equal Citizens Convention,
Hmm.
where one big chunk of proposed amendments would remove the extraordinary monarchical powers that have now accreted to the president,
Right.
whether it's through the immunity that the Supreme Court has granted him, whether it's through this kind of obsessive, extreme conception of him or her being able to control everything inside of the executive branch.
Hmm.
I think we need to restore the sense that everybody is under the law. There's nobody who's above the law, and
Hmm.
that a president and any government official who acts in a way that violates the law
Hmm.
should be held accountable for it. Indeed,
Hmm.
more strictly accountable than ordinary people because they're members of the government. So one part of that convention, I think, should be the No Kings amendments, and then the Equal Citizens amendments would be amendments that would try to restore a representative democracy if
Mhm.
we ever had one. But the number one amendment there would deal with money in politics, and then add to that gerrymandering and add to that vote suppression. And you begin to imagine changes to our Constitution that could take back the capacity for democracy to function from the system we've got right now that has been so corrupted by the rulings of the Supreme Court, which
Mhm.
has consistently acted over the last 30 years to expand or to limit the ability of people to assure a trustworthy democracy. So I think we need that strategy to get amendments to our Constitution, and we need to have the courage to say we can't wait for the Supreme Court to fix the problems or for Congress to get around to doing what we know they'll never do.
Well, one of the big reasons I started the Constitution Cafe initiative, and I think it's probably gotten worse today, is constitutional illiteracy. Most
Yeah,
people, I doubt, would even know what you're talking about. That we
right.
have this outlet to the sort of end around that we can use to have a convention of the people, so to speak.
Yeah,
So,
most people don't know about it. And the people who do know about it hate it because they hate the idea of ordinary people having anything to do with the Constitution. The Constitution is supposed to be above ordinary people. And
mhm.
they want the Constitution to be touched only by lawyers, never allow ordinary people to get anywhere close to it. I hate that. I hate that conception because if that's what our Constitution is, it's not a Constitution of this republic. And we've got to restore the sense that we, the people, have a power, have the right, have a duty to
Mhm.
take responsibility for our
Mhm.
Constitution. And we can't just sit back and whine when institutions like the presidency or the
Mhm.
Supreme Court take that power away from us.
So, we've been looking at things on a more macro level, but I'm worried that we've reached a point of sort of Red Scare type of era that we've already had two times in our nation's history, where people are literally afraid to come out and speak out, where there's a culture almost of silence, of looking the other way, that has led to darkness in open societies preceding ours. Am I being a little too dark about the thing? But because I truly wonder and worry about this. People, I know many people are afraid to say something publicly.
No, I think it's real that people are afraid. Um, it's kind of weird the way this reality has metastasized so quickly over the past decade, I think. I think a decade ago, the fight against so-called political correctness was a fight waged by people on the right against people on the left.
Hmm.
Now, I have a lot of resistance to that fight. I quibble with the terms of the fight. I think it was
Hmm.
overblown. And I think that the fight to assure that we are inclusive as a society is one of the most important modern political movements. So I don't concede the argument, but it certainly was the case
Hmm.
that there was a strong norm imposed across society to change the way we engaged with each other. And I think that was a good thing. But the point is, the right reacted to that. They said that's a violation of free speech. The idea that I can't utter racist comments, or I can't utter sexist comments, or I can't make comments that disable people from being equal participants in a society. That's a violation of free speech. And then they rallied to people like Elon Musk, rallied to like defend free speech. And so in the 2020 election, the fight to defend free speech against the suppression of the so-called suppression of the Biden administration, what were they fighting for? They were fighting for the freedom to share dick pics from Hunter Biden's laptop. Like that was the violation of free speech. And you're
Hmm.
like, come on. Or in the middle of a pandemic, they're upset that the government is trying to make sure that misinformation isn't being spread about the most deadly pandemic we'd seen in 100 years. And
Hmm.
my view is like, even if the government made mistakes, these were not the sort of mistakes that should trigger a deep response from free speech advocates. But nonetheless, that's what they were saying. Okay, then they win
Hmm.
and they become the party in power, not
Hmm.
in 2020, obviously, but then in 2024.
Right.
And now there's a whole range of things where it's not just that you will be scorned or not liked if
Right.
you say certain things, you'll be positively canceled in your job, in your life. And there are many issues which, I think we all should acknowledge we haven't had the courage to engage fully. Each of us rationalize it in our own ways. Like I feel like I have a fight going on around the corrupting influence of money in politics, and I want to be able to build that movement, and I don't want to lose that opportunity by engaging in an unrelated fight, by taking on positions which are toxic or poisonous in the current environment. But,
Mhm.
I think the Palestinians are going to justifiably spend the next 4 generations reflecting on the fact that not only did we do nothing as genocide was waged against them, we provided the bombs. We provided the means through which it was done. And even to this day, that statement, even though it's overwhelmingly the view of American people, and I love Israel. I love the country of Israel, and I obviously have very many close Jewish friends. But I think that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has poisoned Israel in the minds of many people around the world. It was a terrible, terrible decision that he's made that has sacrificed the country and its position in the world.
Mhm.
And that reality is understood and believed by a vast majority of people. But, the political correctness crowd would punish that statement, would make it impossible to even utter that statement in certain contexts. I just saw this incredibly moving video by a soldier, like a guy who had been in the military for 20 years, who had been told by his superior officer that he was under review because he had posted an anti-Zionist thing on his social media. And he said that they told him he was a security risk
Mhm.
because he was anti-Israel. And he said, when did the job of being an American soldier include the job of being pro-Israel? He said, I took an oath to the Constitution
Mhm.
of the United States, not a oath to the Constitution of Israel. And
Mhm.
and I think those are fair questions. And I think the
Mhm.
fact that we're asking those questions or recognizing this reflects the fact that there are many of us who have been uh, uh, slow and cautious in taking on these issues. And now we're seeing the threat of this administration in many different contexts. And the astonishing thing to me is to watch how many powerful institutions just give in. They just cave. Like, if you'd said to me a decade ago that some autocrat wannabe would be president and he would have the ability to bully the billionaires, the lawyers, the universities, the Congress, the courts, the biggest tech companies,
Mhm.
I would have said no, that's not possible. Like the billionaires, they don't need the money. If they lose some money by standing up to a wannabe tyrant, they will stand up to him.
Mhm.
Congress, like if they think that the president is really acting in a tyrannical way, they'll stand up to him. The courts, like the courts, 4 times the court struck down Joe Biden's action because they said it violated the major questions doctrine, which meant he was acting too aggressively as a president relative to Congress. The universities, I would have thought, absolutely never would they concede or give in on the ideas, the commitments to academic integrity. The law firms, my God, their whole existence is about fighting for justice. But I would have been wrong. Basically everybody. 4 law firms stood up to the president. They've won every case so far. The universities, I mean, my own university, Harvard, so far is holding the line, and they were bolstered by a decision in the district court just last week that gives
Mhm.
them some hope. And I think the California universities will stand up to the president because Gavin Newsom will not allow them to cave,
Mhm.
but everybody else just caves. They all make the calculation. It's cheaper. It's cheaper to give in to the extortionist than it is to fight the extortion. And that's true. A good extortionist always makes sure that it's cheaper to give in than to fight. because if it was cheaper to fight, then people would fight. He doesn't want to fight. He just wants to get the benefit of his extortion. And in every one of these contexts, he has set the bar at the right level so that the rational thing to do is to concede. And
Mm.
so they all concede, including, God, including the media. The idea that 60 Minutes
Mm.
gives $16 million to a lawsuit where the lawyer who filed that lawsuit ought to be liable for $16 million in legal fees because of the outrageously baseless claim that he made
Mm.
is terrifying. I mean, they've now accepted a bias monitor that's going to sit inside of CBS News to make sure that it's not biased. Like, when did this become America? Where are the free speech advocates who were worried about the fact that we weren't allowed to distribute dick pics from Hunter Biden in 2020 election? Where are those guys? Because I don't see Elon Musk like riding to the defense of free speech when 60 Minutes is told they have to have a bias monitor watching
Mr.
their
Free
news.
Speech Absolutist.
Yeah,
Where was
these
he?
Yeah, these people are not absolute free speech absolutists. They are free speech when it benefits, when it's in their interest.
Mhm.
So we are at an extremely vulnerable moment. And if we can't find the courage to accept the fact that it might be costly to fight for things that we say we believe in, then the things we believe in will disappear.
Mhm.
It's never been the case that a republic has been perpetual. Every republic has collapsed.
Everyone. Yeah.
And so maybe this is our time. And it certainly will be our time if people don't have the courage
Yeah.
to fight for what we can obviously see as right.
I remember it's been a couple months almost. You had a piece in Slate magazine. I think you referred to Boris Yeltsin and the tanks coming out when people tried to do too much too fast there. And it made me, I remember when I read, I was wondering, what if Trump had federalized the police force in DC
Yeah.
before January 6, 2021? Where would we be today? Would it already be, game over, democracy out?
Yeah, it could have been. I mean, the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2 is that Trump 1 was constrained by serious people with integrity. I mean, I disagree with 100% of their policies, but there were people with integrity.
Hmm.
And, he would say he wants to do certain things, and they would say, you can't do that. Um, the military did that to him. The
Hmm.
Justice Department did that to him. And he fought back, but he didn't actually know how to fight back. Well, when he was gearing up for this last run, there were certain people at the Heritage Foundation who realized he was an easy mark. Like they could take their most extreme ideas,
Mm.
wrap them together in a plan,
Mm.
Project 2025,
Yeah.
and give him support. And if he won, I'm sure that when they first did this, they thought, it's probably a 20% chance he's going to win. The guy, how many people died during COVID because of his incompetence as a president. So I'm not sure that they thought for sure he was going to win, but they thought, 20% chance we get to be behind this guy who comes in and then runs the government the way we tell him. That's worth it. So they build this monstrous plan to remake the American government and they execute on it once he becomes president. Now, of course, during the campaign, he said, I don't know what 2025 is. I've heard some things about it. It sounds terrible to me. I don't know anything about these guys. This is not me. I don't believe in 2025. That is not my proposal. But of course, once he was elected, those guys who wrote that came into his government and they are executing on that plan. And he's pushing as hard as he can to advance every single aspect of that plan. Um, so I think that what that shows us is we have lost a certain immune reaction that is what democracy depends upon. We tell ourselves that we're a system of checks and balances and rule of law. Turns out we're not. There's no
Mm.
checks and balances on this president.
Mm.
Congress is completely caved, even though the things he's doing are things that those members do not believe in. The Republicans do not believe it. He's doing them, they're giving in. And the rule of law, the lower courts are, bravely marching forward saying, here's what the law requires. The Supreme Court's bent over backwards to remove the constraints the lower courts are putting on this president and like slowly coming around to consider the questions that he's raised.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's in that piece. Yeah, it was in that piece. It began by reflecting on Youngstown Steel, which was the case in 1952,
Yeah.
where Harry Truman nationalized the steel mills. Um, and nationalized the steel mills because we were in the middle of the Korean action. He
Hmm.
called it a war.
Hmm.
And he was fearful that the steel mills going on strike would jeopardize the war.
Hmm.
And I think it took 2 months. It's something very short like that for
Hmm.
that decision to be made and the Supreme Court to reverse it. And they vigorously, aggressively described the narrow scope of the president's power. The president is not a policymaker. His job is to execute the policy that Congress enacts into law. And they acted so vigorously that Chief Justice Vinson, in dissent, essentially said, "Who's really afraid of this guy from Missouri becoming a tyrant? This is not a tyrant wannabe. Like, why are we so aggressively restricting his power when he's clearly acting in a way that's advancing an important national interest?" Well,
Hmm.
you know, I agree. Harry Truman was not a tyrant wannabe. But it's hard not to look at this businessman who thinks that government is just inefficiency and he wants to run it like he's running his own fiefdom and
Hmm.
not believe he's a tyrant wannabe. He's shown us again and again he doesn't care about the constraints. And
Hmm.
yet the court has not yet stood up to him in a firm and clear way.
Hmm.
And I think that just encourages more
Hmm.
outrageous, illegal, unconstitutional behavior by him.
Well, as long as there's people like you around fighting the good fight, I simply can't despair. I think that as well known as you are, you still are unsung in so many regards, and I celebrate and I appreciate so much all of your indefatigable efforts to make sure that our democracy somehow doesn't get derailed completely.
I
And
appreciate that, Kristen. Thank you. Thank you for your work. And I have come around to the idea that the most important thing we need to do is to find a way to get people to engage with each other in contexts where they
mhm,
don't talk to themselves. They don't talk to people they agree with, but they talk to their fellow citizens
mhm,
and learn what that deliberation is about. And so
yeah.
you've been doing this forever, and I applaud that work.
Thank you so much, Larry. Until next time.
Okay.
Okay, take good care.